Do you feel guilty for not feeling loved by the person who should have loved you the most? That question stings. But maybe it hurts because, deep down, you've silently asked yourself that very thing. Society built an almost untouchable myth that every mother loves, protects, and cares. That maternal love is unconditional, instinctive, flawless. But what if it's not? What if your relationship with your mother left behind traces of absence, rejection, coldness, constant criticism, or excessive control? Is that still love? Many people grow up thinking their pain is drama, ingratitude, or being overly sensitive. They learn to swallow their tears, downplay their own story, and smile while carrying an invisible weight on their back. But denying that pain only prolongs the suffering. It's time to break the silence. And more importantly, break the myth. Mother wounds are real, and they don't start with you. But they can end with you. Today, I'm going to show you how to recognize this emotional wound, and how to start freeing yourself from it in a practical way. And at the end of this video, I'll give you a challenge that could completely change your story, just like it changed mine. The mother wound isn't just a sad memory. It's like an invisible scar etched deep inside our psyche, one that's been there since childhood. It shows up when, for whatever reason, the mother wasn't able to give the affection, attention, or care the child needed. Sometimes, that's because she herself was hurting too. We can break this wound down into two major types: the active wound and the subtle wound. The active wound is more obvious. It stems from experiences like emotional, physical, or verbal abuse, neglect, abandonment, or direct violence. It's the kind of pain that leaves visible marks and is often recognized as trauma. The subtle wound, on the other hand, is harder to identify, but just as destructive. It shows up in overly protective, controlling, hypercritical mothers who smother with conditional love or turn their daughter into a best friend, flipping the parent-child dynamic. In these cases, the child grows up believing they have to become something to earn love. It's like sweet poison. It looks like care, but it's a kind of affection that distorts a child's identity. Authors like Peg Streep, in Mean Mothers, and Alice Miller, in The Drama of the Gifted Child, show how these experiences build up into patterns that bleed into adulthood, especially when they're left unacknowledged. Carl Jung brings a symbolic and archetypal perspective. The mother is the first image of the world. When that image fails, the child doesn't just feel pain. They build an inner world where love is unstable, affection is dangerous, and the self must be reshaped to survive emotionally. It's like the emotional ground beneath your feet is cracked. You walk, live, love, but always afraid you'll fall. That's why understanding this wound is the first real step toward healing. Not to point fingers, but to name what hurt. Because once it's named, it can finally be embraced. And once you start naming it, something incredible happens. You realize that this pain isn't just one thing. It's spread into your life in ways you might not even recognize. Ways that became almost invisible wounds, but ones that still bleed today. You could spend years feeling like something's wrong with you, without realizing that this feeling comes from an old, invisible, unacknowledged wound. The mother wound, especially when unnamed, disguises itself in behaviors that seem like part of your personality, but are actually defense mechanisms built to cope with a love that was never reliable. Maybe you find it hard to trust others. You always expect the worst, feel like you'll be abandoned, betrayed, or used. That constant distrust may not have started with a romantic betrayal, but with a childhood where your mother's love was unpredictable, unstable, or conditional. Maybe you don't even trust yourself. You feel like you're never good enough, that everything you do needs someone's approval, validation, or revision. That kind of insecurity often comes from mothers who were overly critical, always comparing, demanding perfection, and teaching, without saying it out loud, that making mistakes meant losing love. If setting boundaries feels impossible, if you feel guilty for saying no, if you accept things that hurt you just to keep the peace, that too might be an emotional inheritance. Many mothers made their children believe that love only came with obedience, sacrifice, and self-erasure. A distorted self-image, fear of being seen, shame about your body or your voice. These are all traces of a childhood where being your true self didn't feel safe. The fear of relationships, of loving and being loved, doesn't come from the present. It comes from a past where love meant pain, and affection was followed by rejection. Hypersensitivity, the feeling that everything hurts more for you, isn't weakness. It's adaptation. It's a nervous system trained early on to detect the smallest hint of rejection. And the cycle of repeating emotional patterns, same types of partners, same cycles of pain, it's not bad luck. It's your unconscious trying to heal a wound from the past through your present. But the truth is, all these wounds share a common root, something that was planted long ago in your earliest years and still defines how you love, or how afraid you are to love. From your very first days of life, all you needed was a look that said, "You're safe here." The way that look was given, or withheld, shaped much more than you realize. It shaped how you connect to the world, how you see yourself, how you relate to others. That's what we call an attachment pattern. Attachment theory explains how emotional bonds formed in childhood determine our emotional responses throughout life. And the central figure in that bond is almost always the mother. When that figure offers consistent affection, emotional presence, and predictability, the child develops secure attachment. That means they grow up feeling they can trust others, that they're worthy of love, that the world is a place where it's safe to express themselves without fear of rejection. But when love is unstable, cold, smothering, or absent, insecure attachment patterns emerge. And that's where the mother wound silently sneaks into the way you connect with others. Anxious attachment is born when the child lives in fear of losing love. The mother is present, but in unpredictable ways. Sometimes loving, sometimes critical, sometimes distant. This creates adults who live on edge, afraid of being abandoned, who love too much, who become overly demanding, who shrink themselves just to avoid losing someone. Avoidant attachment develops when a child learns that expressing emotions doesn't help. The mother is cold, rigid, invalidates feelings. The result is adults who distance themselves emotionally, who run from intimacy, who keep control as a shield against pain. Disorganized attachment is a mix of both extremes. It appears when the mother is both a source of love and fear, like in cases of abuse or emotional violence. The child grows up confused, unsure whether to come close or pull away. This leads to chaotic relationships, self-sabotage, and a deep fear of oneself. What all these patterns have in common is the same root, the quality of the bond with the mother. The wound doesn't just come from what happened, but also from what didn't. The embrace that was missing, the silence that lasted too long, the words that never came. And the most important thing, these patterns are not a life sentence. They're a map. Recognizing your attachment pattern opens the door to understanding why certain relationships hurt so much, and why, despite the pain, you sometimes stay stuck in them. Because inside you, there's an image of your mother that goes far beyond the woman who raised you. There's a mother who lives in your head, who whispers in your ear, and who, many times, is far harsher than the real person ever was. When we think of our mothers, we usually picture the real woman, her face, her actions, her words. But inside us, there's something deeper, the psychic mother, the internal image formed through lived experience. It's with her that we often keep dialoguing throughout life. Carl Jung called this image the archetype of the Great Mother, a universal symbol present in the collective unconscious, representing both care and danger. The archetypal mother has two sides, the light side, tied to nurturing, comfort, unconditional love, and the dark side, tied to control, suffocation, guilt, and abandonment. The thing is, when the real mother wounds us, the inner image formed tends to be dominated by that dark side. You can grow up and leave her house, but still be trapped by this inner presence that judges you, demands from you, silences you. It's that voice in your head saying you're not enough, that you're wrong, that you have to please to be worthy. At that point, the wound no longer needs the mother to be present. It stays alive within you, like a silent emotional recording stuck on repeat. And that's why healing the mother wound doesn't depend on your actual mother changing. It depends on transforming your inner mother. This is one of the most liberating truths in depth psychology, because as long as you believe you need your mother's approval to be happy, you'll stay trapped. But when you realize that what really holds you back is the image you carry of her inside you, that's where healing begins. Transformation doesn't happen by trying to change who she was, but by rebuilding how you relate to that psychic presence. It's like renovating the emotional house you live in, swapping suffocating walls for breathing windows, replacing pressure with compassion, fear with strength, silence with listening. And this disconnection wasn't random. You didn't just wake up one day and decide to lose yourself. Little by little, you put on masks, hid pieces of yourself, silenced your voice, until you forgot what your own face looked like. From early on, you learned that you had to be someone else to be accepted. And so, over time, you built a persona, a social mask. It's the version of you that smiles when you want to cry, says "I'm fine" when you're falling apart, that tries to be what others expect, even when it hurts who you truly are. Jung called this mask the persona. It's not fake, but it is incomplete. It helps you survive in the world, but when you over-identify with it, you start to forget who you really are underneath. And very often, this persona was shaped by your relationship with your mother. You became the easy child, the daughter who doesn't cause trouble, the adult who constantly seeks validation without even realizing it. Meanwhile, everything that wasn't accepted, your anger, your sadness, your fear, your desires, got thrown into the shadow. The shadow is the basement of the unconscious. It's where you locked away the parts of yourself that were too judged to be seen. But what's repressed doesn't disappear. It comes back, in the form of anxiety, guilt, self-sabotage. It returns in your relationships, your repeated patterns, your sudden emotional outbursts. At the center of it all is the mother complex, a set of unconscious emotions and memories centered around the image of the mother. When this complex is triggered, you react with the same pain you felt as a child. You could be 30, 40, 50 years old, but in that moment, you feel like a lost child, trying to please, craving love, or battling a void that was never filled. These mechanisms pull you away from your true self, because you start living in reaction mode, shaping your life to avoid pain, to avoid rejection, to earn a love that may never come. But the love you're looking for out there can only be born when you reconnect with what was left behind. Recognizing your persona is the first step to taking off the mask. Facing your shadow is the path to reclaiming your strength. Understanding your mother complex helps you see when it's the past reacting, not you in the present. And it's not just about your relationships with others. It's about your relationship with love itself. Because the way you love today might actually be a repetition of what you learned from her. You might think you're the one choosing who you get involved with, but often, it's the image of your mother inside you that's choosing. Jung said we all carry a contrasexual archetype in the unconscious. In men, it's the anima, an inner representation of the feminine. In women, it's the animus, an inner masculine figure. And these images are largely shaped by how we related to the opposite sex parent in childhood. For men, that's their relationship with their mother. For women, it's their father. But in the case of the mother wound, this influence can be even stronger. Men who were emotionally hurt by their mother, or received unstable love, often develop a wounded anima. This anima shows up in relationships as an unconscious filter. They feel drawn to emotionally unavailable, difficult, or overly demanding women, because they're unconsciously trying to resolve their pain with their mother through their partner. They search in romantic love for the acceptance they didn't get in childhood. Women, on the other hand, often develop a negative animus, an inner voice that's critical, authoritarian, perfectionistic. It's like they internalized a judging father, which was often shaped by their relationship with their mother. That's because the mother may have been the first to reinforce ideas like, you have to be strong, don't depend on anyone, be perfect. The wounded animus appears as extreme self-criticism, self-sabotage, and attraction to domineering or indifferent partners, repeating the cycle of not feeling valued. These archetypes aren't literal. They're symbolic forces in our psyche that deeply influence how we show up in love, how we give and receive affection. And until these internal images are healed, love will keep showing up with pain. But when you recognize that you've been loving from a place of wounding, you can begin to love from a place of awareness. A love that doesn't need to fix anything, just be present. One that doesn't repeat the past, it transforms it. But there's one wound that's even harder to recognize, because it doesn't come through harshness or abandonment. It comes wrapped in a beautiful package, with a ribbon of, I did everything for you, and poison inside. This is the wound of the narcissistic mother. Not every narcissistic mother yells, humiliates, or craves attention. Many are subtle, refined, well-liked socially. But at home, they create an emotionally suffocating environment, where the child doesn't exist as an individual, only as an extension of her. Love exists, but it's conditional. You only deserve it if you please her, meet expectations, and don't threaten her ego. It's a bond that looks like affection, but is really control. The narcissistic mother wants to be loved, admired, obeyed, and often envies her children's light. With daughters, she may compete, criticize their appearance, downplay their achievements. With sons, she may seduce emotionally, making them her symbolic partner, smothering their sense of self. Emotional manipulation is subtle. After all I've done for you, you disappoint me. Don't be selfish. Praise, when it comes, is short-lived and always comes with a catch. This dynamic creates children who live for their mother's approval, trying to avoid rejection at all costs. They learn from an early age that their existence has to be useful, that they have to earn love, that they can't mess up, shine too bright, or go against her. Jung said that when a mother possesses her child's ego, the self cannot fully emerge. The self, the true identity, has no room to grow, constantly being shaped by the mother's desires. The child grows up with low self-esteem, a fragile identity, and an inner voice that repeats all the criticism they heard as a child. They live for others, feel guilty about everything, and deeply struggle to know who they are when they're not trying to please. The child adapts so much to the mother that, in the process, they lose touch with their own essence. And in adulthood, they keep adapting to everyone. At work, in relationships, in friendships. They're afraid to take up space, to be rejected, to just be themselves. But this psychological prison can be broken. Once you recognize the pattern, it's time to stop waiting for your mother to change, to let go of the illusion that one day the love will come the right way, and start rebuilding from the inside out a healthy ego, a you that wasn't born to serve, but to exist. And this becomes even more urgent when you realize that, without meaning to, you're repeating with your own children the very pain you never managed to heal. It's time to break the cycle. If you're a parent, this shift isn't just about you. It's about ending a chain that may have lasted generations. Because healing isn't just your right, it's also your greatest act of love for those who come after you. Many women who carry the mother wound become mothers with a silent fear, the fear of repeating with their children what hurt them the most. And that fear, as painful as it is already a sign of awareness. Because those who repeat without guilt are still asleep. But those who fear repeating have already begun to awaken. The truth is, no mother comes out of her own childhood unscathed. And unfortunately, most carry unprocessed pain, unconscious expectations, inherited patterns. Some, without meaning to, project onto their children what they didn't live, what they lacked, what they once dreamed for themselves. Others lose themselves trying to be everything their mothers weren't, and in the process, lose themselves too. The good news is, the cycle can be broken, not through perfection, not with ready-made answers, but with presence. Being present with yourself is already an act of love that echoes into your children, because children don't need perfect mothers. They need awake ones. Mothers who know how to pause, look inward, notice when they're on autopilot, and choose differently. The cycle breaks when you start treating yourself with the love you never received. When you learn to forgive yourself for the mistakes made before awareness. When you understand that raising a child is also a way to recreate yourself. Being a mother, in this context, is a constant exercise in emotional responsibility. It means knowing that by holding your pain, you stop it from overflowing into the eyes of the next generation. It means giving your children space to be who they are, not who you had to become to survive. You don't have to carry the entire past. You can lay down the pain that's not yours and say, enough. You can start from where no one ever started with you, and that alone is healing. Because one thing's for sure, you can't change what happened, but you can change the weight it still holds in your life, and that's not done through blame, nor by forgetting. It's done in a way you might not even know yet. When you begin to explore the mother wound, it's common for anger to rise. And it needs to, because for a long time, you tried to understand, to justify, to stay quiet. But repressed anger turns into tension, into anxiety, into illness. Feeling anger toward your mother doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who's beginning to recognize their own violated boundaries. But you have to be careful here. Healing isn't about placing all the blame on her. It's not about turning your mother into a villain and yourself into an eternal victim. Anger needs to be felt, but also processed, so you don't stay stuck in it, so it doesn't become just another form of emotional dependency. Jung spoke of the importance of taking responsibility for your own story, not to carry guilt, but to gain freedom. When you understand that your mother acted from her own wounds, that doesn't justify what you went through, but it gives you a choice. Repeat or transform. Healing begins when you stop waiting for the apology that may never come. When you release the expectation that she'll change, or finally see you, or give what she never gave, and choose to give it to yourself. One powerful exercise recommended by therapists, psychologists, and even family constellation work is writing a letter to your mother. You don't have to give it to her. The letter is for you. Write what you never had the chance to say. Write it all. But it's not supposed to be a polished, rational letter. It's raw. It's real. Pour out everything. The hurt, the anger, the grief, the guilt, the longing, the silence. What was missing? What broke you? Don't overthink it. Don't worry about the order. I'm living proof that it works. This exercise helped me deeply. When I started, I didn't even know what I was going to write. But as the words came, so did memories I had long forgotten. And with them, I began to see patterns I had never noticed before. I saw how my relationships, my insecurities, even issues in my financial life, had roots way back. And I only saw this because I allowed myself to write without filters. So just do it. And once you've let it all out, absolutely everything, thank her for what was possible, for what brought you this far. Forgive her, then burn the letter. For real. Make it your ritual, a symbolic act of release. I swear to you, the relief I felt afterward was indescribable. It was like part of a weight I'd carried for years finally left my body. From that moment on, my life started to shift. It was a turning point. So here's my challenge to you. Write that letter, truly, and then come back here. Tell me in the comments how it was for you. Because sometimes, what you write might help someone else who's also suffering in silence. Your experience could be the spark that someone else needs to begin their healing too. Forgiving isn't forgetting. It's releasing the emotional chain that still ties you to the past. It's stopping the fight with what was, so you can start living what could still be. The pain may not completely disappear, but it changes place. From prison, it becomes story. And from there, you can write a new chapter. There are other practices that can help rebuild you from within. Therapeutic writing, for example, goes far beyond the letter to your mother. You can write to your younger self. Picture yourself now, at your current age, looking into the eyes of the child you once were. What did they need to hear? What was never said? What do they deserve to know? Say it all, and read it aloud. This begins to reprogram the inner image you carry. Another powerful tool is the empty chair technique. Sit facing a chair and imagine your mother sitting there. Speak to her. Say what you never could. Then respond as if you were her. Feel it. Cry. Shout. Fall silent. The goal isn't to have a rational dialogue, but to release the emotional weight stored in the body. Meditation with archetypes also helps. Visualizing the archetypal mother in her healing form, the one who nurtures, loves, and doesn't demand, can begin to replace the internalized negative image. You can imagine this archetypal mother embracing you, protecting you, listening to you. Your unconscious understands symbols, and symbols heal. Jung also proposed active imagination, a technique where you engage in dialogue with parts of your psyche as if they were living characters. It could be the wounded child, the inner mother, the critical voice. What does she say? What do you answer? This kind of internal encounter can be deeply transformative. Reprogramming the internal bond means beginning to treat yourself with the care you once hoped to receive from your mother. Setting real boundaries with her, if necessary, is part of that. A boundary is not punishment. It's protection. Sometimes the truest form of love is the one that says, "You can't cross this line anymore." Seeking therapy is also an essential path, especially Jungian or integrative approaches, which work with the unconscious, symbols, and the rebuilding of the self. It's not about blaming your mother. It's about finally looking at your pain with the eyes of an adult, with love and with courage. You don't have to do it all at once, and you don't have to do it alone. Every step you take already begins to shift how you feel inside. And that reconnection has a name in psychology. It's the process of becoming, at last, who you were always meant to be. Not a character shaped by pain, but your whole self. The mother wound, no matter how deep, doesn't define who you are. It may have shaped parts of your path, but it doesn't have to dictate your destiny. Jung called individuation the process of becoming who you truly are, integrating everything that was rejected, forgotten, or twisted to please. It's the journey of leaving behind conditioning and returning to the center of your being. To individuate is not to become perfect. It's the opposite. It's to become whole, to embrace your light and your shadow, your pain and your power. It's to stop looking outward for the love that was missing and begin to generate that love from within. It's realizing that the wounded child still lives inside you, but now there is an adult who can protect them. This journey isn't linear. Some days you'll feel free, Other days, it'll all come rushing back. But the difference now is, you know where you're standing. You know where the pain comes from, and you know you have a choice. Individuation takes courage, because often, it requires letting go of identities you thought were yours, but were really built just to survive. It's like taking off a tight outfit you've worn your whole life and, for the first time, breathing with your chest wide open. This process means acknowledging what was missing, but also creating what was never given. It means reclaiming the value of your voice, your desires, your existence. You are not what was done to you. You are who you choose to be now. And when that decision is made consciously, life shifts. Not because the past changes, but because you no longer identify with it. You stop being a reflection of pain and start becoming the author of your own story. You've spent a lifetime trying to understand why you didn't feel loved, trying to please, to shape yourself, to explain, trying to fit into a space that was never meant for you. But maybe now it's time to stop trying. Stop asking for love where it doesn't exist, and start offering yourself the love you've always longed for. It's not easy, because behind that longing is a wounded child who just wanted to be seen, who hoped for a gesture, a look, a word that would validate their existence. But now you know, sometimes that gesture never comes, and to keep searching for it where it never existed is to stay trapped in the same emptiness. You don't need to beg for emotional scraps anymore. You don't need to prove anything anymore. What you felt was real. The pain you carry is valid, but it doesn't have to lead your life anymore. Today, you can choose yourself. Healing the mother wound isn't about cutting ties. It's about breaking illusions. It's about realizing that no matter how much the past hurt, the present is in your hands. And you get to decide how to move forward, with more truth, with more presence, with more love, the kind that nurtures, that holds, that sets you free. You're not alone in this. Thousands of people carry the same silent pain, but your courage to face it already puts you in a new place. A place where there's no more shame in feeling, no more guilt for wanting to be whole. Carl Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." And maybe now, you're ready to awaken. Don't wait for the past to validate you. Validate yourself. Don't wait for someone else to love you first. Love yourself. A story that began in pain can end in reconnection. And that reconnection starts with you. You can begin, right here and now, to build a kind of love that no longer depends on being accepted. A love that simply is. Because you are. If this content stirred something in you, that's already a sign your healing process has begun. And you don't have to go through it alone. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on the notification bell. Because in the next videos, we're going to go even deeper into this topic, with more tools, reflections, and paths to help you free yourself emotionally and return to who you really are. And if you've made it this far, I want to ask you one thing. Comment below with the phrase, "I choose to set myself free." That way I'll know you stayed with me until the end. And more than that, I'll know you're ready to take this step with awareness. See you in the next video.